Welcome to episode 414 of Control Talk. Now, your smart buildings videocast and podcast for the week ending May 23rd, 2023. I got to tell you, man, it's beautiful here in Atlanta. The flowers are blooming. The bees are buzzing. Man, it's just good to be outside. Just a great feeling all the way around. I hope it's warm and sunny where you are. And we got a great episode for you this week. We're going to dive into marketing again, but with a little bit different bent on it. If you've ever used Distech or Acuity Controls, our guest has affected you in a positive way. And she's going to be on a little bit to share some of the secret sauce with us. Her name is Lauren Scott, and she is a phenomenal human being, does great stuff, both in our industry and outside our industry. So thrilled to have Lauren on the show. Before we get to that, Control Trends was in the news this week. Well, sort of in the news. There were a couple of ratings out for the best HVAC podcast, and Control Trends made a couple of lists. Most notably made the FeedSpot Top 20, coming in at number 8. So really thrilled about that, and thank you so much for acknowledging us, FeedSpot. Okay, so kind of a quick update. I'm headed out of town. I'll be out of town for about 4 days at an intensive marketing workshop with one of the great marketers of our time, Dean Jackson. So I might not be posting much next week. But speaking of post, if you haven't subscribed to the newsletter yet, please do. Couple reasons. Number one being that I no longer send an email out every time we make a post. So if you're not reminded to go to Control Trends, you're going to miss out. But if you get the newsletter, I highlight all the key posts, plus share some other really cool, useful tips. For example, ChatGPT. If you haven't used that yet, I did a video last week on how to get started with it. And every week in the newsletter, you're going to get a ChatGPT prompt that you can just copy and paste into ChatGPT and get all kinds of cool output. So I encourage you to play with it if you haven't played with it already. And you can sign up for the newsletter with the link below, and I will not share your data with anybody else. I won't spam you. That's my promise. So it's just a way to stay in touch, keep you informed, and give you control news you can use. And before we get to our guest, a word from this week's sponsor, Sevenox out of New Zealand.
Ladies and gentlemen, the story you are about to hear is true.
Old radio shows are fun, but old ways of doing things aren't. Sevenox is a new way of doing after-hours HVAC scheduling. Sevenox is a cloud-based application that automates tenant after-hours heating and air conditioning requests. Tenants can book requests right from their smartphones and web browsers. No more wasted time wrangling spreadsheets and generating invoices each month. Billing is fully automated, with monthly emails and accurate invoices sent directly to your inbox. And because tenants can manage their own bookings, last-minute cancellations won't result in wasted energy heating and cooling empty spaces. Start doing things the new way. To learn more about Sevenox or to schedule a free demo, visit sevenox.com.
Okay, if you haven't heard from Elwyn and Brian yet, you will. Even though they're down in New Zealand, they kind of have a global footprint and they're growing it. They're really making quite a presence in the United States now. I think they're going to be at AHR next year. I met them at AHR this year in Atlanta. Their tenant override system's really cool. Definitely check those guys out. And hey, if you want to be part of the Control Trends community in terms of advertising, we've got a couple of different plans. You can obviously sponsor a show like Elwyn and Brian did from Sevenox. They also bought a banner ad. But more importantly, that we got several different options. So click on the link below if you're interested, reach out. We'll have a conversation, try to put together a custom package that will work just for you. It's more than just banner ads. We can include marketing campaigns, helping make videos, create videos, as well as all the different advertising spots we have on Control Talk, as well as obviously sponsoring a show or maybe even being the sponsor of the newsletter. So lots and lots of options. But the point here is click on the link. We'll schedule a call. We'll find out what works for you and we'll make it happen. Okay, with that, it's my pleasure to introduce Lauren Scott. I have a very special guest this week. I've been a big fan of hers for a while. If you've bought Distech Controls or Acuity Controls, she has influenced you in one way or another, whether you realize it or not. A person I have a lot of admiration and respect for. I didn't know all the cool things she was up to, so we're going to share some of that on the show. But my guest this week is Lauren Scott. Lauren is the VP of Marketing and Sustainability for the Intelligence Spaces Group. Lauren, thanks for taking some time to be with us.
Thanks for having me on, Eric.
Well, first of all, let's talk about the Intelligent Spaces Group, because I've always thought of you as Distech. What does the Intelligent Spaces Group do?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's a change that came about coming up on 2 years ago. Acuity Brands, which is our parent company, Distech Controls, was acquired about seven or so years ago. And 2 years ago, Acuity Brands really split into two separate business segments. So there is the classic lighting and lighting controls, which is certainly what Acuity is best known for in the market, largest lighting manufacturer in North America. And then the Intelligent Spaces Group, we are a side group that is really looking at making buildings and spaces smarter, safer, and greener. And that obviously, when you're hearing that, makes sense with that Distech Controls as part of that. But we're also grouping in Atrius, which is our cloud application side of our business. And then most recently, you might have seen in the news a couple of weeks ago, Distech Controls and via Acuity Brands just acquired Key2 Therm, which is refrigeration controls as well.
Oh, yeah. We've been keeping up with that. And of course, Lauren, I guess one of your roles is obviously to take all that and have it make sense to your customers that are existing and potential customers. So we're definitely going to dive deep into marketing and branding this week. But before we get there, let's share with our audience a little bit about your journey.
Sure, I'd love to. I definitely have always known I wanted to be in the environmental space, and we don't necessarily always connect BMS with the environmental space, but it was something that I knew that I wanted to do. And when I first came out of university, I studied marketing. I was working in a marketing agency and worked there for a couple of years. And I started to realize that our clients that we were representing just weren't in line with my values. And I've always been somebody that will put 120% into what I do. And I realized if I'm going to do that, I might as well do it for an organization that I believe in and believe in the values. And I ended up working in the nonprofit space for a number of years. And I was working for charities, either as a spokesperson or managing the communications, public relations, some of their marketing. But it was more on, I would say, the social side versus, if you talk about E, S, and G, it was on the S of ESG. But I was missing that environmental side. And I knew that's where I wanted to end up. And 10 years ago, I saw a posting for what was then more of a startup in Canada, which was Distech Controls. And I remember not sleeping at all the night before. I knew this is the job, this is the industry I wanted to get into. It was this really fun startup with 15 minutes from my house that I had never heard of, like a lot of people who joined our industry. But I could tell that this is the direction I wanted to go in. And so I was able to get the job, and I was managing the communications, public relations for the company starting in 2013. And then we were acquired in 2015 by Acuity Brands, which is now where I work. And at the time, I was doing a lot of the PR and communications for our founder, and just with a natural ebb and flow after an acquisition, he ended up leaving. And I did use that as an opportunity to try on something else. So for about a year and a half, I worked still in the environmental space. I was working for a renewable energy company that was establishing themselves here in Canada, and was looking for somebody to be a communications advisor. Really loved it. Was definitely feeding the environmental need in me, but I missed Distech Controls. I remember being on our LinkedIn and snooping and seeing what the company was doing, seeing what our industry was doing, and just genuinely missing it. So in 2017, I got a call from Trevor Palmer, for those of you in the industry, and he called me and mentioned that Distech was looking for somebody to lead their marketing for the full team and not just communications and PR. And I ended up coming back. It was definitely a very different landscape to come back to a company that had gone through an acquisition, but perhaps had missed what tends to be a little bit of that most challenging time, the first year and a half after an acquisition. And it was right when Martin Villeneuve, who a lot of people know, was really reestablishing the leadership for Distech. He had come in, he was appointed president of the business, and was reviving the brand, I think, after what is a very tumultuous time in any acquisition, and really getting ready to take the company to the next step. So from 2017 until 2021, I was leading the marketing team, which split between Montreal and France, and just really helping deliver on that vision of what does Distech Controls look like. And it was after our launch of Eclipse, so it was certainly a transition for our industry going IP and what that meant in terms of our messaging. So it was really an exciting time to be part of the leadership team. And then in 2021, had the opportunity to take on a broader role to include our colleagues on the Atria side, and also use it as an opportunity to carve out a formal role that included sustainability. I think for a long time, our industry has been comfortable with our products, letting them do the work for us in the sense that they're helping buildings become more energy efficient, but not necessarily always looking internally and seeing what we're doing in terms of our operations to be better corporate citizens. So a lot of great things were going on at a grassroots level, but it was really centralizing all of those efforts into a formal sustainability component of my role.
Okay, Lauren. Now we're going to have to do probably 4 or 5 podcast episodes just to dive into all this really cool stuff you said. So I want to unpack a couple of things if you're okay with it. So the first thing I want to acknowledge and tell you about is you really do take sustainability very seriously. It looks like both Yale and Harvard, you've got certifications for them in sustainability. So just real quick, give us a thumbnail about what that's about, and would you recommend that to other people in our industry?
Absolutely. So I admittedly have a full education in marketing, and I knew that it continued to be something that was clawing at me, that I knew I wanted to add it. I didn't want to do away with marketing, but I wanted to add in a formal capacity, the sustainability elements. I knew that would come through education and experience. And so from an education standpoint, we are at a beautiful time where there is a democratization of education, and we can go take certificates online. So I was able to take these classes and really go back to school part-time and to be able to get some of these certifications in a way that I could stay in Montreal and be able to advance my education that way and be able to meet colleagues who are also going to Harvard and Yale and University of British Columbia on certain topics. So that was a phenomenal experience. It's definitely different if you haven't been. I hadn't been back at school in 15 years, and to do homework again on nights and weekends was definitely, I did it at least in the depths of Canadian winter where
I can hear some of these conversations now. Martin, I can't get that report because I have a term paper.
Exactly. I don't think I saw my friends for a number of weekends there, but it was humbling to realize how much you fall out of the habit of doing homework, and just to be able to be surrounded by some of those minds. And that is the beauty, is that I had classmates that were from all around the world that were all trying to tackle this topic that is a global topic. So that was a really unique experience. So how has that informed your branding and your marketing and your messaging? Let's just say your messaging per se, based on what you learned there. Yeah, it is a great question, and one that I reflect a lot on. It's interesting. Growing up, I never totally felt like I fit into either group, because I definitely have the environmental side and the business side. And I felt like I was always too corporate for the environmental side, and then too granola or environmental for the business side. And we're now at a point in our economy where we need people like myself, and we're many people that can speak to both sides. So while we might not perfectly fit into either silo, we're able to cross the bridge together. You're like a bridge. Yeah. And I think taking those classes, it was all executives and everyone was trying to come from that lens, but it was people who were very passionate about the sustainability side. And so it's trying to figure out how can we speak to each group in a way that resonates with them, that is meaningful to them, and is not accusatory either, because I think it's easy to point fingers across the board and just say it's your fault or your fault. But to really see how we can move everything forward together, it's all about how we phrase it. No, I completely agree. And we're going to have to do about 10 or 15 episodes, Lauren. Can you just be my co-host for eternity? Because I think we could talk about stuff forever. The communication side and the phrasing, the words we use, I'm a big proponent of. Is equally as much about how you say something as what you say. But, and speaking of that, now I don't want you to give away the secret sauce. So meanwhile, back when you were doing all this stuff at Distech, I was out on the road trying to compete with Distech. It was before we became a Distech distributor. And I got to tell you, your messaging and your marketing, it was everywhere. And people knew about, this is in Georgia and Florida, and people knew about Distech. You guys were getting specified. End users knew about you. The integrators knew about you. It was notable, right? I was going, what in the world? Who is doing this? And now I know it was you and your team, right? So let's talk a little bit about, and I don't want you to give away the secret sauce, but let's just say integrators, for example, or contractors or even distributors. What would be our marketing process? What would be step 1, step 2, step 3? And I realize this is going to be an oversimplification. What would be the starting point? And can we walk some of our listeners through how they can have a Distech type marketing plan? Sure. Maybe just to backtrack on a second, I do have to give credit where credit is due in the sense that we also have a phenomenal product, and that is through our
Yes.
R&D and product teams, and we're able to deliver it, and that's through our operations team. But it is a cross-functional collaboration, and I've been lucky to work and to market a brand I genuinely think is fantastic. So that is probably the baseline. But if you're starting a marketing team, and definitely the approach we've always taken is, what problem are you trying to solve? I think sometimes we try and sell our product just by selling what features we've created, but why did we create those? And really to get to the root of it and go back to when you're doing the product development itself, what considerations were you talking about? What was your voice of customer? What was it that you were trying to address? Why are you investing all of this time and money in creating this product or this feature, and making sure that's being communicated out? I think we tend to say this new controller with this many inputs, this many outputs, but why? Why is that important? So to talk about the real value in each addition that you bring to the market.
No, it makes a lot of sense. And you guys have always been great at that. I've done some work with some companies trying to help them with their marketing a little bit. And it's especially, I think, in our industry, we're so tech focused, right? It's, let me show you this new controller, instead of, do you have this problem? What have you tried to, how have you tried to solve the problem? What's worked? What hadn't worked? Start with that as a baseline and go from there.
Absolutely.
So how have you seen marketing and messaging change since you got involved with marketing?
Since I got involved in marketing, the landscape has definitely changed. I remember when I was first working in a marketing agency, and it's funny because now I'm seeing it with our interns coming in, and they make me feel very old. But I remember being the intern and starting and saying, there's this thing called Facebook, and being told, oh, it's not going to be a big deal. We don't need to get on there. And it's, since that time, it just has exploded even faster. The pace of change with our digital presence and how we have to show up as brands. And so I think that has changed really the way we communicate with one another. I think for one thing, the way we absorb information is very different, just because of the sheer scale of everything we're absorbing on a day-to-day basis. We now consume content at headline level. We are just reading, we're scrolling. That's all we're seeing. We're not getting deeper into the content. And a contrasting example I can show to that is when I first started at Distech Controls, our product updates were flip books. And so there were these long 30-page, they were digital, but they were a PDF flip book of 30 pages where we would describe our products. And now we've gotten to the point where we have our product announcements and it can't be longer. The core information has to be above the scroll. You can't even have a scroll in your email. So you really we've had to package it down. And it's not to say that someone doesn't want to double click and get more information, but just they need to see at a very high level within seconds what you're trying to communicate to them. So I think we've had to get a lot more efficient with the way we talk and also the way we share that information. I think static information is definitely more challenging in order to get that attention. And so one way that we're managing to do that, and certainly the trend that everyone is going towards, is more video content. So we're definitely seeing that, for example. But just staying, I think, abreast of what trends are happening in our industry and seeing how to best engage with our customers is something, it's an evolving thing, I think, and the change is just going to be faster and faster.
No, couldn't agree more. The good news is it's really easy to create video content. And the good news is you got a ton of different platforms that you can get out and reach your community on.
Yeah.
It's not just Facebook or Google or YouTube anymore. The bad news is you better be doing that, because it's not like everybody's going to one place to consume information. LinkedIn's pretty solid. I don't think you can go wrong with that, but you're probably not going to reach your younger audiences. And I like to tell people that if you've got me as a customer already, you just got to take care of me. You don't have to do much with me, but I might not be around much longer. The people you got to be aiming for, the people that are coming in the industry. So how do you reach them so that they grow up with your product? Because they're going to be your customers for the next 20, 30, 40 years.
Yeah, that's certainly exploring different social media platforms. I think our website continues to be key. And maybe just if we go back to the topic of video content, I don't want it to seem overwhelming either for system integrators who are listening and feeling like they have to have the best graphic video designer to help them. People also just really appreciate seeing the faces and the names of people that they know with their supplier base. So even if it's just you hopping on your iPhone camera and speaking about something that is new to your organization, that typically really resonates. So it doesn't need to be expensive. It doesn't need to take a ton of time, but it allows that human connection, even though it's virtual, you can still create meaningful content that way.
No, yeah. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, I was going to say one of the great services, because Mitch Day is our rep. We've got so many great Distech reps. If you're listening out there and you're fortunate enough to deal with Distech, just get your Distech rep and say, come in, I want you to interview me, because there's no better. Hey, this is Mitch Day. I'm here with such and such integrator. They're one of our great partners. Have Mitch ask you questions about your business and so on and so forth. And then you just upload it to YouTube. And now you've got video content that's meaningful and it helps promote your business. So you put that on your Facebook page or wherever you want to put it. Absolutely.
And there are free tools out there that free. I think Canva is maybe $100-something a year for a phenomenal tool. Like that is the beauty, is I think as much as the online world and the tools are becoming more and more complex, there is a ton of competition as well. So in terms of costs, you can get things at a very accessible rate. Even if you're a mom and pop shop or a startup and you want to be able to start creating some of this, there are tools that are available at a really affordable rate.
Oh, they are. And it has gotten so much easier. It's with the AI tools now, you can just record your video and it'll edit it for you.
Absolutely.
And have you used Descript yet?
I haven't, no.
Oh, God, there's this. And for our audience out there, this is worth talking about, because typically when you would edit video, you go into something like Final Cut Pro or iMovie or something like that. You bring the video footage in and you watch it and you cut and you bring the pieces together. What Descript does is you take your video, you upload it to Descript. And then what it does is it creates a transcript. So here's your video on this side of the screen. Here's the transcript. And if you want to edit something, you just hit delete there. And the beauty of it, Lauren, and you haven't done one I yet, so you're definitely a professional. I do a lot of ums and ums. The beauty of it is you can do that transcript, you could highlight, and it'll take all the ums out automatically, and it automatically creates the transition so your video comes together. So I think it's free right now, to your point. It's like a free tool. But
I'll be checking that out.
Yeah, for sure. Lauren, we've talked a couple of times about communications and the words we're using, and we're also talking about attention. There's an attention deficit. We're bombarded with so much information. And I've always been of the opinion, and I want to see what you think, that if you're putting any message out, you better have, in the copywriting game, we call it like a headline. You better have a headline, or your first statement better capture their attention. Yes. And then your second statement better follow that up. And if you get past the first two, then they're probably going to watch your video or read the rest of your post. Are you finding that to be true?
Absolutely. Absolutely. To the point where even just the title, the subject line of your email can radically change the open rate of your email that you're sending out. And we're able to at least leverage tools if we're sending out a marketing email where we can do A/B testing. And sometimes we see a dramatic difference between just the subject line or even the preview text that you see. So we're able to see tangibly and statistically the difference between the two, but absolutely the same thing as if it's for social content, podcast name, episode name. Huge value there. On the flip side of that, I think it has been to perhaps what is contributing to a lot of polarizing in terms of messaging out there and what we choose to read and not read. And I do think, we've mentioned off air before this episode, I think there is an enormous amount of value in long form conversation like we're having right now.
Yes.
Because most of the time we agree on most topics if we really get into, why you're approaching that project or that topic from a certain angle, and the other person might have a different approach. But if you're having a real genuine dialogue, you tend to really understand each other a lot better than just those attention grabbing headlines. So I think there is a place for both. We understand we're absorbing so much information that you have to be very concise. So there is a value there too. But I do really strongly believe it needs to be complemented by these more meaningful conversations.
No, couldn't agree more. Again, you said a lot. We could do 3 or 4 episodes just on that little snippet right there. So for our listeners out there, I would strongly recommend, and Lauren probably would too, that you need to be getting people's email addresses so you can get hold of them. You probably need to create a newsletter, which basically means you probably need something like a MailChimp or some way to capture those emails so that you can effectively send out your message. And when Lauren says A/B, for our listeners who might know what A/B testing is, will you tell them real quick what that is?
Absolutely. So it's anytime you're doing let's say we'll use the example of an email. You're sending out a newsletter and you won't change anything else on your newsletter except one specific feature, and you want to see what's going to perform better. So we use the idea of the subject line. Let's say you're sending it out to 1,000 customers. What you'll do is you'll do testing on your subject line on a smaller subset of your 1,000 customers. So maybe to the first 50, you'll still send 25 emails to your customers using one subject line. And then your other 25 sample size, you'll send with another subject line, depending on the performance of each one. So which one gets opened the most, your remaining customers in that 1,000 customer list will then get it with the winning subject line. So you're testing option A versus option B, and that's where you get the A/B testing. So it could be a subject line. It could be if you have a button in your email that says, click here, or your option B is get a demo. You can try playing around with your language to really see what grabs the attention the most, and then you can deploy it to your larger list to maximize the chances that they're going to open or click through.
Yeah, it makes total sense. Marketing like this is very much sort of trial and error and tweaking.
Absolutely.
But I think it's a critical piece. And you said something else too about the long form. Ultimately, that is what we really want to be able to have the conversation, the long form conversation. But unfortunately, in my opinion anyway, and I'll get your opinion on it, because of the attention deficit economy we live in now, people just bombarded with too many messages. You can use the shorter term, at least I do. The shorter term content earns you the right. They see you, it's, hey, this is interesting. And then they go, yeah, I want to subscribe to their YouTube channel, or I want to get on their email list, or I want a demo of their product. So it would be great if you could just all of a sudden put something out like a long podcast and everybody wanted to listen to it. But until you earn their trust and likability, for lack of a better word, we tend to be influenced by people we like or people we want to be like. Mm-hmm. And that's really the whole point of the social media thing from a marketing perspective. Agree or disagree?
Absolutely. Yeah, it does take that entry point. And if we take the podcast example, you will need a catchy title, or if you're having a YouTube video that's helping to promote it, your title there is going to have to be catchy, or whatever the image is going to have to be catchy. So it's the doorway into that longer form dialogue. So it's certainly a balance that you need to have. But I do think that the benefit of having that longer form behind that door at least allows for a little bit more substance, that maybe someone feels a little, not off-put, but like challenged when they read the title, but when they dive in and listen a little bit more, it might open their eyes to a different way of thinking that they hadn't previously. So it allows for growth beyond just the initial reaction.
No, it makes so much sense. And what I hear in that, it probably makes sense to have your long form content either already created or in mind, and then create the the shorter form content first. For example, I was working with a client, and they had me help them shoot some videos. They wanted to do some marketing videos, which were short form marketing videos, really cool, really pop, would get attention, right? So they're going to stand out. But it was like the whole, they were going, well, that's cool. We'll put them on our YouTube channel or whatever. No, you're not, in other words, I guess what I'm trying to say is you have to think in terms of sequences, right?
Yeah.
Or campaigns, so no, what you want to do is, we want to get their email addresses, but we want to create something of more valuable, to your point, the longer form content. Because what could that be? Says, look, why don't let's do a webinar. Just say, hey, if you like this, send me your email address. I'll be putting together a webinar later in the year, and you'll be the first to know. Well, I don't have a webinar yet. Yeah, you don't need to create one if nobody signs up for it. So this is how these things can work together.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And if you have a website, for example, blogs continue to be popular. It is shocking. I thought it was going to be a blip in the pan, but it continues to be important, certainly from search engine optimization. If you're trying to get your website found online when somebody is Googling BMS in Wisconsin, and you want your website to be able to, or system integrator in Wisconsin, and you want your site to pop up, by having blogs on your website that has more information, to Eric's point, then it allows Google to find you a little bit more readily. It's a much deeper topic, but that could be one option. So it could be a webinar, it could be a podcast, it could be a blog, it could be a longer video. Maybe you have what we call like a sizzle video that's exciting, it's really fast paced, it's 30 seconds, but there is also a video of 10 minutes where you have your product managers or your sales team talking about why they're doing a certain approach. Yes.
And I think the other thing that slows people down is they want it to be perfect. before they start. And I tell people, nobody's going to watch your first 5 or 10 YouTube videos anyway.
Yeah.
But you got to start.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And if you think of just from our own, we tend to always think of companies, but if you think about our own user experience, that when you go on someone's YouTube channel, you don't really care about their first 10 videos, but when you click on their page, if they have more than 10 videos, it just adds a certain layer of credibility. Even if those first videos only had a few views, you think they're consistent. They clearly are content creators. Look at all this content that they have. So it adds instantaneously a certain amount of credibility that I think as users we recognize, and sometimes we forget to even think about our own personal experiences when we're trying to build it out from a business lens.
And the other thing too is that in business, we're always trying to get new business or take care of our customers. And one way we've always done is we send people out, right, to go and find new customers. But I've always thought that one of the great things about marketing, and especially in this day and age, is it's much less expensive to be found. And one way to look at it is you create this salesperson, which might be a YouTube video or a podcast or a blog. You put it out. You never have to pay it, and you never know when it's going to hit. So I think it's just for all our listeners out there, I encourage you to get really active. And now we're going to shift gears to one of my favorite topics, because Lauren is also a podcaster. So talk to us a little bit about your podcast. You got more than one.
So it is very new. It is very new. Only the kind of started the concept about 9 months ago, and then launched in the spring of 2023. So it is very new. But the genesis behind it was, again, as someone who cares deeply about sustainability, I've dedicated my whole career to this. It was over Canadian Thanksgiving last fall. I remember I was just reading the news, and it was story after story of everything going wrong with our climate. And I remember just thinking, what is the point? Why am I doing this? Clearly, I'm having no impact if you're reading all of these headlines. And then I turned the page, and there was an article about a startup who was just doing something super creative and innovative and experiencing business success through their startup, trying to address it in climate change in a really creative way. And it just snapped me out of it. And so I thought, well, if that was such an immediate, visceral reaction that I had to that, there's probably an enormous amount of value of sharing those success stories more often. And again, if we get back to those headlines, because we're trying to get attention, they tend to be really negative. And I do think that there is an incredible amount of value to share the success stories to help inspire other people pursue business options that can really address problems through their solutions. And so right now, the show itself is called The Resilience Report, and it's showcasing businesses and business leaders who are really demonstrating how to be resilient, whether it is an economic situation and certainly the environmental situation, and are just really disrupting their respective industries. So we've had people from property managers in the UK to a concept that I wasn't familiar with, which is investor advocacy. And so it's individuals who invest in certain companies and then are able to advocate for stronger, for example, in this case, net zero claims. We also are featuring somebody who specializes in recycled plastic. And I was asking him questions as to how do you do product design, for example, as a manufacturer, controllers to include recycled plastic. So just trying to figure out really those change makers, what makes them tick, how are they staying resilient in pandemics, in supply chain shortage, labor shortage, what are they doing, and just sharing their stories, because I think we need to keep each other motivated. We are all part of the solution. I think the BMS space or the HVAC space is such a part of the solution. And so it's keeping people motivated and focused through those stories.
I've listened to one episode of the podcast. I plan on listening to them all, and really nicely done. I encourage our audience to check it out. I will put a link in the show notes to check that out. First of all, Lauren, super big props for this. Is a really meaningful topic, and I applaud you for keeping it in front of all the listeners, because I think it is something we all need to take seriously and get on board with. So big props for that.
Thank you. And there is such an important thread there with long form dialogue. Climate change or sustainability is extremely polarized. And I get that. And I understand why it is. But at the end of the day, when I speak to most people and you talk about reducing energy consumption, reducing costs, reducing reliance on foreign energy, improving sustainability rating. People are all on the same page. Like, everyone wants to achieve the same thing, or getting more jobs locally. When you have that conversation, most people agree on the fundamentals, and maybe it's the headline people don't agree on, but they agree on what you're trying to achieve from a value standpoint.
Yeah.
And so that's really coming back to the long form dialogue and the value, and why I wanted to do a podcast versus, for example, something maybe that was more at that headline level.
No, absolutely. Let me ask you, I think at least in the States, it's so politicized. I don't trust any of our politicians on either side, because I think they politicize it. The media, I think, tries to keep us divided. Is it that way in Canada as well?
I would say a little bit less, but it is a reality. And we have a certain number of our provinces that are perhaps leaning more one direction than the other. And so it's perhaps often at a provincial level, it's often you're seeing division between urban centers and rural areas, and you are still seeing a little bit. So it's certainly a conversation that we need to have here too.
And of course, the other thing too, just purely solving the sustainability problem is good for people in our business. There's no downside there. For our listeners out there who are trying to say, I'm going to create a website, and I'm hearing what Lauren and Eric are saying, what kind of content can I create? Videos, one form you can do, but man, a podcast. Walk them through, how hard is it to set a podcast up?
It would take a little bit more effort than I think I maybe gave it credit, but it is the kind of thing that you're chatting off air before, that it is just about the first thing and the most important thing is just turning the mic on.
Yeah.
And you can't care about that perfection piece that we're talking about. And already I'm only several episodes in, and I listened back to the first one, and I can already hear how I'm improving because I was able to pick up on what I was doing wrong. And so it's a growth opportunity as well. And if you don't want to commit to a full podcast, you can also think about reaching out to podcasts. If you see some that are in the industry, often, I'm sure, Eric, you can relate as host, you're constantly trying to find guests and content. And so if you have someone who proactively reaches out to you and maybe says, well, you have a podcast in my industry, I would love to give you my insight. This is why I think I can add something. You probably have a really good chance of getting on that show. So that might be another opportunity without having to do all the logistics of setting something up.
No, completely agree with that. And getting podcast guests it's not really that hard. And part of what I'm getting at is to do a video cast, you got to buy a camera, you got to do the video editing, even though it's gotten easier, as I said, through Descript. But a podcast, really, you use Buzzsprout, and I use Buzzsprout for one of mine and Libsyn for another. You're talking like $9 a month to host your pod. So the way it works is you record the podcast. Again, you can use something like Descript to do it. And you write up a piece, you upload it to your hosting platform, which might be Buzzsprout or Libsyn or somebody else. They'll give you an embed code. You put it on your website, and there's a really cool web player on your website, and there you go. You got it right there. Just look at Control Change, look at Lauren's. You'll see how cool it looks. But the cost of entry to get into a podcast is really low. And to Lauren's point, it's something you can drive people to longer form content. Your podcast becomes a conversation. And it makes a huge difference to how people view you in the marketplace.
Absolutely. And credit to you. You've been doing this for a number of years. And sometimes the question I get is, do we really need another podcast right now? But I still think it's in its earlier phase for podcasts. I think there are a lot of us who listen to them regularly, but I think there's a whole next group of listeners coming in right now who are just starting. So I don't think it's too late to get into the game if people have been considering it.
No, I agree. Talk about, now you're managing multiple brands. What sort of goes into that? Do you think about them separately or as one? And
yeah, you certainly have to. I think our industry on the Distech Controls or on the HVAC BMS space still tends to be very relationship based. And I think that's actually something very special that we need to continue to nurture. So there is a lot more nurture campaigns where you're reaching out to the same individuals. You're making sure there's more of a back and forth dialogue. When you're talking about cloud applications or SaaS, so software as a service, that tends to be at a whole different scale. And it tends to be often if it is at a higher volume, it tends to be a little bit more impersonal, but very high volume. So the advertising is very different. So for example, in more of a classic industry, you might invest more in trade shows because you want to go have that direct face-to-face time. On the software side, on the software as a service, cloud application side, you might invest more in digital advertising because you do need to go reach that scale of contacts. The two approaches are very different. There's some overlap, actually. Both Atrius and Distech Controls will be together at IBCon in a few weeks in the same booth. So there are some tactics that you see as the same. But the moment you have different customers, different kind of partners, then you really do have to take it on a brand by brand basis as to what makes the most sense.
Gosh, so much, Lauren. We've tried to just cover marketing 1001 in like 30 minutes, and you've done a great job. I think you've given our audience some really great things to work with, some great takeaways, and I thank you so much. How do people get hold of the different brands? I'll put them in the show notes, and then how do they get your podcast?
Sure.
Which I'll put a link in that too.
Distech Controls, it's distech-controls.com and atrius.com or acuitybrands.com if you want to see maybe what our parent company is at that level. And then for the Resilience Report, it's the resiliencereport.ca up here in Canada, so .ca, or you can find me on Instagram or on LinkedIn. I think probably LinkedIn is the best opportunity to find the Resilience Report. I do try to share snippets from our interviews. And then always come find me on LinkedIn. I'm always happy to engage in conversations there as well.
Yeah, and if you go there, you're going to get to see, if you scroll Lauren's stuff a little bit, you'll find a picture of her as a little girl with her first, I think it was fundraiser, right? For
Yes.
Sustainability, which is awesome.
Yes. I was 6 years old and I sold my toys to raise money for the World Wildlife. And that was the first time I remember really knowing one day I would end up in the environmental space. And I'm really happy it ended up being our industry.
Awesome. Now, for people out there who might want to contribute financially to one of these sustainability causes or the Sierra Club or whatever, if they're going, yeah, I'm concerned about the environment, I'd like to donate some money, what would you recommend? What would be the best place for their dollars to get the most bang for the buck?
Yeah, full transparency. I sit on the board of directors of Sierra Club Canada Foundation, and Sierra Club, I think, is a very well-known name in the United States as well. And so that is where I've been dedicating my time over the past 6 years. Phenomenal organization, but there are others out there too. If you want to dive in a little bit deeper, just maybe see where they're contributing. Maybe you want something closer to home. That is definitely a great opportunity. I do recommend doing a little bit of research as to where you want your money to go, but checking out what their latest newsletters. Again, if you go back to communications, newsletters tend to be the best way to know what they really are actively up to. So the same way we would communicate that as a business, those nonprofits or charities tend to as well. So I would check those out. Check out their website, check out their blogs. It is really all of those same mechanisms, and then you're able to evaluate it that way.
And then make sure to listen to Lauren's podcast as well. So. Well, listen, Lauren, thank you so much. Very much appreciate it. That's Lauren Scott from the Intelligent Spaces Group. You know her from Distech, you know her from Acuity, and the question is, what are you going to know her for next? I'm thinking Prime Minister of Canada, maybe.
No, thank you.
Lauren, thanks so much. I appreciate
All right,
it.
thank you so much, Eric.
So there you go. That's another week on Control Talk, now your smart buildings video casting podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. Special thanks to our guest, Lauren Scott, and our sponsor this week, 7Knox. So with that, man, have a great week. Remember, be bold, stay in control, stay relevant. Hey, market something this week, man. Think about what you heard from Lauren. See how you can apply some of those principles to your business. As Hunter Thompson used to say, buy the ticket, take the ride. We'll see you next week.
Got me upside down, spinning around you. Wanna taste the clouds, dance with the moon. Take a trip around your body. Boy, I love the way you got me. Starry-eyed, got me starry-eyed. Losing all my focus, I can't even control it. You know your lips are golden.